Okay guys, back with exercise 27B, the female reproductive system. Here we see a mid-sagittal section. This is actually a model that we have in the lab. So let's go down the list. Obviously here's the urinary bladder. It's going to be in front. There's the pubic symphysis. We had that on our male list, but we didn't actually have them photographed, so don't worry about that part. So where do we want to start? So we have the bladder, there's the urethra, the tube leading out, and then the female. Okay, down below it we have the opening to the vagina. It's this tube here. This tube leads up to the uterus, with, in common parlance, the womb. Inside the uterus, of course, we have this heavy muscular layer. We'll talk more about that. At the very front part of the uterus, you have an area called the cervix. This is an area that we screen for cervical cancer. We also have vaccines against the virus that is thought to be responsible for that, Gardasil and some of the others. Okay, now, if you notice, hold on a minute, guys. Okay, see if I can draw. Nope, not yet. Well, let me draw. Okay, yeah, I can draw. Okay, so the cervix comes down like this, and the vagina comes over like this, so that you can see the cervix actually protrudes. Now this part right here, and this being the front of the body right there, that part is going to be called the anterior fornix. So obviously the part over here, right there, is going to be the posterior fornix. Make sure we have everything on here. That's everything we've got on this. The rectum, of course, is the terminal portion of the colon. Okay, looking at it again, here's the vagina, there's the uterus. Now the uterus is going to have several portions. We have an endothelial layer on the inside. It's called the endometrium. We have this big, thick, smooth muscular layer. And by the way, this is the strongest muscle in a human body, and it is called the myometrium. There's the cervix again, and the vagina, of course. Trying to think of where I was going with that. Let me look at my list, guys. I want to make sure I don't forget anything. We don't have it listed down here, but this outer portion right there is the perimetrium. Endometrium on the inside, myometrium, big thick muscular layer, hence the word myo, and then the perimetrium here. Okay, this portion here is considered to be the body, that's the cervix, and this round portion, remember, you may remember this from the stomach, we also had one of these. This dome shape is called the fundus. Okay, now here are the ovaries. They're attached to the uterus by the ovarian ligament right there. You can see it right here. And then coming up from the uterus is this very long tube, uterine tube or fallopian tube. Again, I learned it as fallopian, but either one will be correct on our exam. Now this tube has got several portions. This portion right here is called the isthmus. This next portion is going to be the ampulla, I know we had an impure in the male, but that's the way it is. And finally, this area that just really kind of balloons out, funnels out, is the infundibulum. And on the end of the infundibulum, these little finger-like projections are called fimbriae. These, I don't know, you may not know it, you can see right there, there's an ova, an egg cell, actually being ovulated from the ovary. It actually goes, these guys are not actually touching, they're just in proximity to each other. So it actually has to travel through the internal space to get there, in which case it does start that journey and eventually implants in the uterus. But this is why you can get ectopic pregnancies that will plant outside the uterus, because it has the possibility of actually leaving the reproductive system totally. It's kind of a problem, guys, but not too much. It works out. Okay, so there's the ovaries, the portions of the fallopian tube, the portions of the uterus, both the layers and the different names for it. We have the ovarian ligament right there, which is attaching it to the uterus. We have the suspensory ligament of the ovary, which actually attaches it to the wall of the abdomen. We don't have it here, but this is, oh, well, this thing right there, which you can see right in there, is the round ligament of the uterus. This guy right here is called the broad ligament. I'm going to check, make sure it's on your list. I want to make sure we got all that. We got the fornix, infundibulum, da-da-da. Yeah, the broad ligament's on your list. I don't know why it's not on here, but that is the broad ligament. Maybe I've got it on a different one. Anyway, here's the external genitalia, also called the vulva. So this area right here, this mound of tissue that is above the pubic symphysis, is called the mons pubis, mons being like a mountain. Okay, on the female, we have the outer lips of the vagina. These are the labia majora. They are covered in hair normally. These are hairless. They're called the labia minora. And there's the clitoris. Clitoris is basically the female analog of the penis. It is developed in the same way. And just as we talked about that there was a prepuce on uncircumcised males, we also have a prepuce that covers the clitoris. There's the external urethra orifice, the end of the urethra. Here is the actual vagina. The greater vestibular glands are on either side of this, but I think we just got it marked on that side. Those are also called Bartholin's glands, if you want to use that term. B-A-R-T-H-O-L-O-L-I-N, Bartholin's glands. Either one works for me, guys. I'm not particular. Okay, getting much more deep. Let me make sure that, unfortunately, guys, the lab list doesn't follow a logical order, and at some point maybe I'll edit it and put it in order, but I'm given the lab list. So let's see, I think we've covered all of that. Anterior, yeah, we actually got everything that we had to do on that. Okay, as far as the ovary also has cortex and a medulla. I don't know if you can see it on this one. Yeah, we can. There's the cortex. The medulla is, of course, going to be this portion in here, right in through there. The ovarian ligament, remember, that attaches it to the uterus. Okay. So we've got that. Now, These guys are called primordial follicles. These are germ cells that have arrested in the early phase of meiosis 1. Every female who is born with all of the egg cells that she will ever have, and there's like 1 million between the two ovaries. 1 million between the two ovaries, so there's more than enough to take care of any possible needs that she might have during her lifetime. Those primordial follicles, you don't want to look at that, we want to skip over here, are eventually they'll start on a pathway to develop. And this has to do with the menstrual cycle, which we will cover in the last PowerPoint on this. But these guys are in the process of development. Multiple egg cells develop at one time. Only one is going to be ovulated, and that's not one per ovary, that's one period. Only one egg cell. The male is going to produce 250 million sperm, but the female is one egg cell. So the primordial follicles go about there, and they're going to do this under the influence of follicle-stimulating hormone and the luteinizing hormone coming from the anterior pituitary gland, the gonadotropins. In any case, going to develop into the primary follicles, and inside the primary follicles, you're going to have the primary oocyte, and that is the egg cell. Around it, you're going to have these granulosa cells, which are kind of like nurse cells that are going to help take care of it. Again, based on how things are going, we'll get the secondary follicle here, and eventually one of these are going to turn into a tertiary follicle, and it's also commonly referred to as a Graafian follicle. In the tertiary follicle, we have that secondary oocyte. We have a zona pellucida around it. We have this fluid-filled antrum here, and this is going to be the final stage in development. After this, according to the hormones, at one point in a month, the female will ovulate, which is basically this part of the ovary will rupture, and this oocyte will be ovulated, it'll be pushed out. Remember what I was telling you about, that it's going to actually have to, and those fimbriae are actually going to move like this. They're going to create a wave motion, kind of like suction to try to bring it in. After this happens, then what's left, and by the way, we should have put that the thecal cells are around here. They're also helping with this. What's left is going to become the corpus luteum. This guy is going to be important when we talk about the physiology, because this is the guy that's going to produce progesterone. Progesterone is going to keep the lining inside the uterus intact until we see if this egg cell is going to be fertilized. In other words, if it's going to join up with a sperm cell from the male, and the two halves of the DNA join together to form a human being. So this is the corpus luteum is going to be responsible, when you see it over here as well. It's going to produce that. Now, if the oocyte is fertilized, then the baby will actually start producing progesterone. He's going to produce, hang on a minute, guys, I've got to think of it. It's what we use on those at-home pregnancy tests to check for pregnancy. It's going to, the baby is going to stimulate, is going to produce a chemical that is going to maintain the corpus luteum. It's going to keep it from basically shutting down. Now, the corpus luteum is only going to go through about the first trimester, and thereafter, the placenta is going to produce progesterone, Without progesterone, then the layer of the uterus is going to slow off, which is what happens in menstrual flow. So if this oocyte isn't fertilized, then the corpus luteum will degenerate, it will break down. It'll eventually become the corpus albicans, and which is going to be nothing but like scar tissue. And the lining inside the uterus is going to slow off, and that's what menstrual flow is the loss of that tissue, and the tissue will be slowly built up again over a month. Didn't really want to get too much into the physiology, but it's kind of hard not to when I'm telling you about these things. Again, I always believe that it's easier to remember stuff if you understand what it's for, what it does, the context. Okay, mammary glands. This really doesn't belong in reproductive, but this is where it's always been, so it's where we're going to keep it. So in the mammary glands, basically the breasts are sacs that have milk-producing glands and a lot of fat, bags of fat. That's basically what they are. But in between the adipose tissue here, and you see the pectoralis muscle, because where it hangs, there's suspensory ligaments. We don't show them on here, and it's not on your list, but that actually attach the breast to the pectoralis muscle. Okay, so we have the adipose tissue. We have the lobules. These are resting lobules. See how small they are because they're not actively involved in milk production. These lobules are for a lactating mother, very enlarged. We have these lactiferous ducts. So these glands here are going to produce the milk, go through the lactiferous duct, and then be stored in the lactiferous sinus very shortly. And then the stimulation on the nipple, there are nerves around there, the stimulation of which is going to stimulate mom's oxytocin and all of that for the milk ejection, so that it'll be pushed out. And these are like myoepithelial. There's some muscular kind of element to push the milk out so that the baby can get it. Let's see, nipple, and that's the nipple, of course, is the area where that are the terminal portions between the lactiferous sinus and the outside world. Areola is just the pigmented area around the nipple. And I think that's everything else on the list, guys, for that. Okay. Let me look over. I want to make sure I didn't skip anything. Don't think so. Looks pretty good. Okay, microscope slides. This is obviously going to be of the uterus. There's the endometrium. Now this layer looks pretty thick, but again, it's subdivided into a functional and a I don't think I got it there. Oh well. In any case, there's a functional layer, and it is actually built up every month slowly during the menstrual cycle. This layer gets larger and larger and thicker in preparation for an egg implanting there and a baby developing. And of course, if it doesn't happen, then it slows off and we have the menstrual flow. So that's the endometrium. You got a functional layer that slows off, and you've got a basal layer that's always going to be there. The functional layer grows from the basal layer. The myometrium, which is big, thick, muscular layer. And then there's the perimetrium, the outside fibrous capsule. Okay. Mammary glands, the only thing we need to know is secretory alveoli. And there's the lactiferous duct. I don't know why that's the only two things they put on there, guys, so that's all. I'm not going to add to your thing, but the secretory alveoli is going to be the portions that we saw that were thin. Those are the glands that are actually producing the milk. The lactiferous duct, of course, is the one that's going to carry it to the sinuses. That's adipose tissue. That's why I covered it up, because you really didn't need to know that. That's something you've already had a blue billion times. Okay, sperm cell. There's only 3 things that you have to know. There's the head, and the uppermost portion is going to be the actual DNA. There's the mid piece, and then there's the tail. This is like a motor that turns it. This is the only flagellated cell in the human body. There's a lot of fructose in the semen I told you about, and that's used as fuel to move these guys. Also a lot of alkaline substance, because the vagina is normally acidic, which will kill these guys. So they bring alkaline substance there to neutralize it so they can make a run for it. Okay, ovary, the cortex, the medulla, we've got primordial follicle, primary follicle, secondary. I know they're all over the place. There's a tertiary or Grothian follicle. There's a corpus luteum. Now, they've also got this about the primary oocyte, but I'm not going to ask you that. Just know the follicles, because you can't really see. You can kind of see the egg cell right there, but a lot of these are just way too small, and I'm not going to ask you guys to do that. That would be ridiculous. Okay, so this is the seminiferous tubule. We talked about the inside the testes. They have the interstitial cells. These are cells that, well, I'll tell you more about that when we get to the thing. Let's just go with it. The lumen, I don't know if you can see, I put all these white boxes over here because they were asking things that weren't on your lab list, so I didn't want you to be encumbered with things that you're not going to be tested on. But you can see right here this space, that is the lumen. This is the inside of the tube. And spermatozoa, we don't have that there, so I wouldn't worry about it. Well, guys, that's everything on the female reproductive. What we have left is the physiology. It's kind of involved, not as involved as it is in the lecture, but it's still, there's quite a bit there. So, I will see you in the last video, exercise 27C, the physiology, very shortly.